This is Kashmir, a place of breathtaking beauty, often called paradise on earth. But behind these snow-capped mountains and peaceful lakes lies a deep and painful truth. For decades, Kashmir has been one of the most heavily armed places on the planet, claimed by two nuclear-armed neighbors, India and Pakistan. So how did a place so beautiful become the heart of a conflict so bitter and so hard to resolve? To understand this, we'll have to go back to British colonial rule and the partition of South Asia.
There can be no question of coercing any large areas in which one community has a majority to live against their will under a government in which another community has a majority.
In 1947, as the British Empire prepared to leave India after centuries of rule, the subcontinent was divided into two new countries, India with its Hindu majority and Pakistan created as a homeland for Muslims. But the partition of India wasn't as straightforward as drawing a line on a map. India was not a single unified entity, but a mosaic of British-administered provinces and over 560 princely states, each ruled by local monarchs. While the British planned to divide their directly governed territories into India and Pakistan based largely on religious majorities, the fate of these princely states was left undecided. States like Kashmir, which were not under direct British rule, now faced the critical question of whether to join India, Pakistan, or remain independent.
Statesmanship and inspiration are needed as never before, while India's future still hangs in the balance.
Kashmir at the time was a state roughly the size of Britain and had a majority Muslim population. But a Hindu monarch, Maharaja Hari Singh, ruled it. The British had effectively sold Kashmir to his great-grandfather through a treaty known as the Treaty of Amritsar. Now, under the rules of partition, princely states like Kashmir could choose to join India or Pakistan, or try to remain independent. Maharaja Hari Singh couldn't decide early on and prolonged the process, likely hoping to stay independent. But as communal violence swept, Kashmir couldn't escape the turmoil. By October 1947, armed tribesmen from Pakistan's northwest had invaded Kashmir. Facing an internal revolt and now an external invasion, the Maharaja turned to India for military help, and India agreed.
The Indian government is flying troops into Kashmir, stopping first at Jammu, 100 miles south of Srinagar.
But only after Hari Singh signed the Instrument of Accession, ceding Kashmir to India on October 26, 1947. Indian troops then entered Kashmir to push back the invaders. On the other hand, Pakistan, which saw Kashmir as a natural extension of its own Muslim-majority territory, also sent forces to support the tribal fighters and local rebels. This was the first Indo-Pakistani war over Kashmir.
As they fall back, the marauders leave burning villages and desolation behind them.
By the end of 1948, the fighting had reached a deadlock. On January 1, 1949, the UN stepped in and it arranged a ceasefire. A new ceasefire line was drawn, and UN observers were sent to monitor it. The line divided Kashmir into two parts. Pakistan took control of the west third, and India held the rest, including the main Kashmir Valley. The UN still wanted a vote to happen, but only if Pakistan pulled its troops back and India reduced its military. That never happened. The promised vote never took place, and the ceasefire line slowly became the de facto border. Each side began to govern their territories under its control. The uneasy peace didn't last long. In 1965, nearly 2 decades after the First War, Kashmir again ignited conflict.
Indian troops have been called on to repel guerrilla fighters near Srinagar, who, Delhi alleges, have the official support of the Pakistani government.
Tensions peaked when clashes broke out along the border. Then in August 1965, Pakistan launched Operation Gibraltar, sending thousands of troops covertly across the ceasefire line into the Indian-administered Kashmir, dressed as local insurgents. The plan was to provoke an uprising in Kashmir against Indian rule. Instead, it triggered the Second Indo-Pakistani War. India retaliated by crossing the international border near Lahore, leading to a full-on war involving tanks and aircraft. After a few weeks of intense fighting, both sides were exhausted and global powers were alarmed. A UN-mandated ceasefire ended the war in late September, restoring the previous positions. Despite that, Kashmir remained a flashpoint. The third war between India and Pakistan happened in 1971, but this time it wasn't directly about Kashmir. It began with a crisis in East Pakistan. As a result of civil war, millions of refugees poured into India. In response, India stepped in, partly for humanitarian reasons, but partly to support the Bengali independence movement. The war lasted just 13 days in December 1971. It ended with a decisive victory for India and the birth of a new country. Even though Kashmir wasn't the cause of this war, what followed had a major impact on Kashmir dispute. In 1972, the leaders of both countries, Indira Gandhi from India and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto from Pakistan, met in Indian town of Shimla. They signed what became known as the Shimla Agreement, which aimed to bring some stability to the region. One of the most important parts of the agreement was to make the old ceasefire line in Kashmir officially the line of control, or LOC. Both sides agreed to respect it and not try to change it by force. They also promised to solve their issues peacefully and bilaterally, and for a brief moment, it looked like real peace might be possible. After 1972, there was a pause in full-scale wars between India and Pakistan, but Kashmir remained tense. Throughout the 70s and 80s, there were regular clashes along the line of control, and the two countries had a rocky diplomatic relationship. Both nations were also dealing with their own internal struggles. Pakistan saw political unrest and military coup, while India faced economic challenges and political instability. Still, Kashmir issue never faded. Then in the late 1980s, the issue took on a much dangerous form. A major insurgency began inside Indian administered Kashmir. Many Kashmiri Muslims, angry about what they saw as broken promises and unfair elections, began to take up arms. Some wanted independence for Kashmir, while others wanted the region to join Pakistan. Pakistan said it only gave these groups moral and diplomatic support, and once again called for the promise of referendum to be held. But India accused Pakistan of much more, of training and arming militants and sending them across the border. India called it cross-border terrorism. Pakistan denied the charges, but evidence showed that the weapons and fighters were indeed crossing into Kashmir. Throughout the 1990s, Kashmir became a battleground. Indian forces and militant groups fought fierce battles across the valley. Civilians were often caught in the middle. Both sides, militants and Indian troops, were accused of serious human rights abuses. By some estimates, tens of thousands of people, including civilians, militants and soldiers, lost their lives during this period. And then came the nuclear factor. India had carried out its first nuclear test in 1974, making it clear that it had nuclear capability. Feeling vulnerable, Pakistan began working on its own nuclear program. In 1998, both countries openly tested nuclear bombs. India tested in May and Pakistan followed just weeks later. From that point on, any future war over Kashmir carried the risk of going nuclear. This made the international community sit up and take notice, and forced both countries to become more cautious when dealing with military action in Kashmir.
The United Nations Security Council met to condemn the nuclear tests carried out by both Pakistan and India and to urge both countries not to undertake further tests.
Even while violence continued in Kashmir, both India and Pakistan made some efforts towards peace. One major moment came in 1999 when India's Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee took a symbolic bus trip to Lahore to meet with Pakistan's Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. They signed the Lahore Declaration, agreeing to improve relations and stick to earlier promises of the Shimla Agreement. It gave many people hope that peace through dialogue might be possible. But those hopes didn't last long. Just months later, fight broke out again, this time in the mountains of Kargil, in Indian Ladakh region. Using mountain passes that had opened after snow melted, Pakistani soldiers and allied Kashmiri fighters secretly crossed the line of control and took up positions on the Indian side. Their goal was to cut off a key highway that connected Kashmir with Ladakh. What followed became known as the Kargil War. This was the first time India and Pakistan had fought directly since becoming nuclear powers. Indian soldiers launched a tough and dangerous operation to take the mountain peaks. The fighting happened on extremely high altitudes and lasted for months. Thousands of soldiers died on both sides. In the end, India pushed back, and under international pressure, Pakistan ordered remaining fighters to withdraw. By July 1999, the fighting was over, but it was a close call. A limited war fought under the threat of nuclear weapons, and it showed how fragile the situation in Kashmir still was. The fallout was political too. Later that year, Pakistan's military leader General Pervez Musharraf took power in a coup. removing Nawaz Sharif, many believe that Kargil played a major role in this. Hostilities rose again in 2016 when militants attacked an Indian army base in Uri, killing 18 soldiers. India blamed Jaish-e-Mohammed and responded with what it called surgical strikes across line of control. Pakistan denied any strikes happened at all, but either way the situation worsened. In the following years, cross-border shelling and attacks increased. Soldiers and civilians were killed and people living near the border lived in fear. Inside Kashmir, anger was growing. The killing of militant leader Burhan Wani in 2016 sparked protests and crackdown. And summers in the valley turned into cycles of unrest and grief. In February 2019, a bombing in Pulwama killed 40 Indian soldiers. Jaish-e-Mohammed claimed responsibility. India responded with airstrikes deep inside Pakistan.
Pakistan and Indian jets clashed overnight above the disputed region of Kashmir.
Pakistan responded the next day, shooting down an Indian jet and capturing the pilot, who was later released in a gesture of peace. The world watched closely as the two nuclear powers came dangerously close to war. Just months later, India made a historic and controversial move. In August 2019, it revoked Article 370, which gave Jammu and Kashmir special autonomy. The region was split into two union territories under direct control from New Delhi. A strict lockdown followed. Thousands of troops were deployed, internet and phone lines were cut, and political leaders were detained. The government said this would bring peace and development, but in Kashmir, many saw it as a betrayal. Even today, more than 75 years after partition, Kashmir remains unresolved. It's a region of beauty and heartbreak, divided by borders, politics, and generations of pain. Despite peace efforts, the conflict continues to shape the lives of millions across South Asia.